Hello everyone, welcome to Coffee Cup Enlightenment. Today we're going to go over the basics of enlightenment. And before we go into that, we're going to start with who are we? So who are we is a seer. It's like a set of eyes. And what it does, it sees. And what it sees is content. This seer doesn't have any content to itself. It is the observer and seer of content. This seer is also untouchable because it doesn't have any content to be diminished or be broken or built or developed and dismantled. It is untouchable. Only content can be touched. Untouchableness, or content, I should say, the seer is contentless. So our contentless identity cannot be touched. It's like you can't touch air. And this seer, it's pretty much the inevitableness for everyone to develop a personal identity. And this personal identity is constructed out of ideas. And it's the nature of this personal identity that is constructed out of ideas. It has pretty much all the faces within it. It is the victim of its own judgments, judgments which go out to the world, which are interpretations of the world, which is neutral. And through its own judgments, it experiences disturbance. And our seeing-ness, our observer-ness is watching this. And also our observer-ness is actually feeding this, because we are identified with this bundle of ideas. So it is a victim because we have identified ourselves as the one that's actually making judgments. So we're feeding this judger, which is a bunch of ideas. And then those ideas go out into the world and they bounce back to the idea, which we are observing, this personal ideahood. And it feels disturbed of its own judgments. And then another face of this ideahood would be it wants to fix itself. And we are the observer of the fixer. So it creates all sorts of actions and non-actions, avoidances, rules on itself. We are the observer of all these actions that the ideahood is making. And so you can say it's maybe the hero. So it's the victim and the hero. And we are the observer of the victim and the hero. But we are not them. We are untouchable, contentless, observerness, observing the stage that goes on. And what gives life to the whole stage in the first place is our observerness. So whatever comes into play in this ideahood is a perfect mirror reflection of what our observerness needs to become realized. And when it does become realized, all that stage of ideas disappears. So the highest question you can ever ask is, am I touchable or untouchable? And once you have enough awareness within you to realize that you are untouchable. You can use this awareness to see the touched one, the touched ideahood of character, and let it be disturbed because it's not you. One of the tricks which I've mentioned in a few videos is once your awareness is rooted in itself enough, and you recognize yourself as awareness and not what goes on in the foreground, then whatever goes on in the foreground and it being disturbed in the foreground and you're watching it, untouchable, your untouchableness is watching it, you can actually want it to be disturbed. You can say you can allow it to be disturbed if you want to change the language a bit. But you can actually smile and allow it to be disturbed because it's not you. It's not you. Just going to pause it a bit. So another thing that goes on in the foreground is the bundle of ideas wants to be enlightened. But you're already enlightened. You can never be enlightened because that's what you are. So this again is necessary for your observerness to come into fruition, into realization. When this striver is observed and no longer identified with, then that character disappears from the stage. And then in its place is your observerness comes more into fruition. Because we are contentless in nature, there is no such thing as growing or development or evolving. However, it can be perceived that this self-realization does seem to grow, you can say. But it's not really growing. What's actually happening is the content which mesmerizes our observerness is no longer being mesmerized by with anymore, because we are seeing it's just content, it's just an idea, and then our observerness is coming forward a little bit more. So it was already there. There is no growth in consciousness. There is only, you can more accurately say, there is the coming forward of what was already there in the background, which is our observerness. Our observerness also is ever at peace. And even to use that word, I'm just going to pause it a bit. So even to use that word, peace, somewhat implies unpeaceful, but it's our inherent nature. Only touched things can be unpeaceful, and that is the character, which is a bundle of ideas. Ideas will mesmerize us. They're pretty much, it's almost inevitable for everyone to take on some idea of themselves. But this is very important to realize also, that this personal identity, which is just an idea, it's actually not fully online all the time. So pretty much when you're asleep and then just as you wake up, there's about a half a second to a couple seconds where the idea hasn't uploaded yet. So there's a slight gap of so short that you what it's like to be without this personal ideahood. But pretty much within a second or two, it's uploaded, and all its stories and feelings get uploaded too. But this is what's important to realize, is that this personal idea throughout the day, it actually fluctuates. It comes and goes. One of the major things that makes it go is a serious emergency, such as big car accident or something. Even if you're just seeing the car accident, it seems to just knock the whole idea of personal ideahood aside for several moments. And although it might be sort of a bit challenging to see whatever's going on in these sorts of circumstances, if you pay attention, that you actually realise you've actually forgotten the idea of who you are for just a moment during these intense moments. Other times that this personal ideas of who we think we are temporarily fluctuates throughout the day, just when we get tired, or when we're about to go to sleep. And then as the ideahood drops down, so does the peace, which we are, take its place. So it's never us that's disturbed, it's the personal ideas. But it appears that we are disturbed. If you ask 99% of people will unquestionably say, I am disturbed. Everywhere you hear, every sentence, every conversation, there is I, and associated with this idea, and that idea is disturbed. And it almost seems like from the 90s, the 2000s, to the current day, there's been a great growth in Western culture to express these feelings. It's almost like psychology bringing itself into the world, and it has made an influence. And it's somewhat useful to express these ideas. But I think we're at the stage now where these ideas have been expressed to the point where there is no message behind it to disidentify that this one that's being disturbed, that's being expressed, isn't us. It's the touched character, the touched ideahood. And whatever words are spoken in his expression, you're talking about this character, not us. And so what this does is just builds up massive psychology bills. Suicides. The character creates more identity through this expression. So, and then as it identifies with this expression of all these disturbances being spoken about, with complete identification that it is us being disturbed, then the character gets more disturbed and it kills itself. And it's just so prevalent that every single sentence you'll hear on TV, in the radio, everywhere, 99.99% of it's spoken with this expression hood, is actually where it's spoken about an illusion. It's 100% complete identification, and the service of expression is no longer in service anymore for an awakening. If it just lies at that level, there does need to be some expressiveness of the disturbances within one's self. It is beneficial, because otherwise you just become, the character just becomes straight away stimulus and then responds, usually with violence or something. My arm's getting a bit tired. There we go. So yeah, if you do get into expression hood, then this can help create a bit of a space and bring in some awareness to being what's actually happening within oneself. But it isn't our self that's been affected, it is the character. And you won't hear any of this being spoken anywhere. The most fundamental question of the universe is, are we touchable or untouchable? And if you come to some basic realization, yes, we are untouchable in my observerness, then all those psychology bills and every single sentence that's uttered is complete nonsense. So all the textbooks of psychology that keep building up more and more every year with endless definitions of characters, all those books are actually talking about an idea, not us. So if you ask the most fundamental question to psychology, are we touchable and untouchable, then they will probably, most of them will say that we are touchable, and we are subject to be broken, and we are subject to be fixed, and this is complete nonsense. The untouchable ever peace that we are observes the touchable character, which is subject to being built up positively and then crumble into negativity, which is called the positive self-esteem and the negative self-esteem, but both are ideas. It is complete effortlessness to be who you are. Jesus said, deny thyself, but what he's talking about is deny the ideas. If you want to reach Godhood, deny thyself. Deny the bunch of ideas of who you think you are. And when all that disappears, your consciousness will come forth naturally. You can almost say like there's 10,000 kilograms of weights holding the boat underneath the water, and we are the boat. And as soon as you look at all these weights up on top of you and say, hey, they're just ideas, they tip off to the side and sink, and our boat raises to the top. But it was already there. And it's a natural occurrence for the boat to float. So deny thyself. You won't hear any of this really in psychology. Psychology's concern is to turn your negative self-esteem into a positive self-esteem. It's a waste of money. You're only kidding the idea. You're only giving the ideas more life. And even if you're quite successful at building a positive idea, it's still an illusion. And even that positive idea will be subject to never-ending disturbances, never-ending feeling of incompleteness, and it will never be right. So, and you'll just be spending all that money to build that, if that's where you're going. So a simple way just to self-counsel is ask yourself, if you want, write it down and put it on your fridge. Am I touchable or untouchable? And if this observerness is realised pretty confidently within yourself that it is untouchable because it's observing the touched character, then say to this idea when it rises within you, fuck you. And that's done lightheartedly, because it's not personal, it's just an idea. Say fuck you to the idea. And there's no one, no personalhoodness in saying even fuck you. I'm only using that as a sentence. in neutrality, if it can be perceived in that. But so much care is given to what's happening to these ideas and what it's doing, and it keeps our untouchableness identified longer. But even that, this one that's actually caring, that's the idea as well. So it's caring about itself, itself's own existence. And our observantness is watching the carer. Our observantness is watching the victim. It's watching the fixer. It's watching the carer. It's watching the one that's saying this is taking too long. What can we give the name to that one? The one that thinks it's taking too long, which is the idea speaking, not us. What can we call that? The time dweller. The time dweller is completely necessary for our consciousness, because if we had brought it to our full attention and transcended our identification with it, then it would disappear. So everything that comes into our field of consciousness is given life by us, the consciousness, and is 100% and completely necessary to be on the stage. And be grateful that this stage is eventually going to end, and you are going to realise the truth of who you are, and you are going to realise and be ever peace, ever blissful, ever content, ever untouchable. So enjoy. Here's another enlightenment hack. Enjoy the madness on the stage, and this just makes the madness on the stage disappear even further. Love it. Welcome it to come. Open up the stage doors, and none of these characters will come. The characters will only come on stage when you're identified with them. And through your identification, you're feeding them. It's your life being directed away from who you are into these ideas. And then the ideas play up on stage, and we're the ones doing it, but unknowingly. Love that it's disturbed is one of the most fastest way to enlightenment. Love that the ideas are disturbed. Want the ideas to be disturbed. Welcome the disturbed ideas into your home to stay as long as they want, and that just obliterates them even further. You are untouchable. It's not personal. You're not killing ideas. You won't go to jail for it because they're just ideas. To wish the ideas to be allowed to suffer, to want to allow them to be in suffering, you won't be in prison for that either, because they're just ideas. It's not personal. What's ever present is you. The ideahood comes and goes. And as mentioned in previous videos, the ideahood pretty much it wasn't even there at birth. You didn't even know concepts yet, which makes up the ideas, which is the beginning of the foundation of personal identity ideas. So as soon as all this started, the first seeds of ideas started, of this personal identity. So you can say almost you were already in full flourishing of enlightenment when you came into this world, but you didn't know yourself as that yet. So it's almost inevitable that personal identity and identification with these ideas is necessary. And it's our consciousness that not really makes these ideas, but really associates with particular ideas that are going to bring forth this boat. So you can almost say only certain cargo of ideas will sit on this boat and submerge it, that correspond with the boat underneath. So maybe you can say if the boat is round, Only round ideas will sit on top of the boat and submerge it. If the boat is square, then square ideas will sit on top of the boat. But every idea that plays out on the stage is necessary. It's an exact corresponding mirror reflection of the consciousness that's awaiting to come forth, to arise and be self-realized. It's not personal. So let the ideas be disturbed. Let the ideas be the victim. Let the ideas want to strive for enlightenment. Observe that. Let the ideas complain that this enlightenment's taking too long. Observe that. Let the ideas complain that it should be enlightened already. Observe that. Let the ideas complain that it shouldn't have to be unenlightened. Observe that. Let the ideas claim to be enlightened. Observe that. Whatever it is on the play of the show, there is one thing that doesn't move, that is always present, and that's the observer, you. Ideas come, go. From the 10-year-old idea that gets uploaded every week, to the 12-year-old idea, to the 20-year-old idea. What happened to the 10-year-old idea? It's been added upon and subtracted and modified and altered. And we are the observer of all these movements, these passing clouds. So imagine an ideahood that's negative. A bundle of ideas that's negative, or a bundle of ideas that's positive. Which one would you be? You might say, I'll be the positive ideas. But why be that? You could be untouchable, ever at peace, ever undisturbed, ever complete, ever abundant, in exchange of ideas. The ideas at a time during the initial stages of one's life will seem so important, so relevant, and so identified with. And it's during those times, it's their critical moments, I guess, because those ideas could bounce anywhere into murder, suicide, and usually disease as well, which are pretty much the three physical manifestations of the idea personalhood, which is suicide, murder, and disease. And why does it have those three outcomes? Well, I guess murder and suicide would be the fundamentals of being a personal identity. It's an image being compared to the world, judgments made to the world and to itself of what it thinks it is and what the world is, what the world's done to it, what the world should have done, so forth. So it represents individualism. The observer is the awareness of individualism, but the observer is not an individual. It needs no individualism. And one day, who knows, if everyone's self-realised, we'll say, wow, can you imagine? For thousands of years, we bought into this idea of individualism. We saw it as so important. And of course, it was necessary for the time. It's not necessary to imagine a world without individualism. But you don't really need it. And you can still have some of the ideas that can somewhat categorize you as an individual, but you don't identify with these ideas. So it's not necessarily ideas that are the problem, or individualism that is the problem. It's our association as our identity with ideas and individualism. So if you're not identified with it, then it's not a problem. And ultimately the one with the problem is the ideas. It makes judgments to the world. It feels disturbed from its own judgments, and it tries to fix itself from its own disturbances. And our observerness is watching all of this. But see how the many faces of this idea manifest itself. And it will get you to identify with it in many of those stages of those faces. But as you come out of it, the identification, and observe it again, less is the chance you are able to buy into it anymore. And the highest virtue of this identification is a smile. You smile at the ideas, because you're just an idea, and I'm ever here. It was never personal. So that's why I was saying, say fuck you to this ideahood. It's just a smile. It's bringing a smile, certainty, but it also may be too much of a strong of a word for most, and too much individualism brought into that word. So don't use that if that's how it's going to be. I don't really need to use that word. I've only just brought it up for this talk. Don't really use it at all. But definitely I use smiling, wanting, come into my house idea. Come and tell me all your problems. And as you do so with this smile, the idea obliterates. And as it obliterates, our consciousness that gave it life comes back to us. And it feels like an orgasm. And that aliveness and orgasm stays with you. A part of it stays with you. It's the boat coming more up to the surface. So the highest orgasm is when the boat's sitting on the top. A couple of years ago when I had full enlightenment, when I woke up in the morning, and it lasted for 1.5 days.